I think we can get started because I see the participants coming and right now it's 12 o'clock. So let's get started. And good morning or good afternoon, everyone. And welcome to today's COPSS-NISS leadership webinar entitled Leadership at the Intersection of Causal Inference and Interdisciplinarity. And my name is Shu Yang. I'm currently an associate professor of statistics at NC State. And I'm also a member of the 2024 class of the COPSS Leadership Academy. And I'm thrilled to be your host today for this insightful session. Let me first introduce a little bit about the COPSS and this webinar a little bit. So COPSS is the Committee of President of Statistical Society. It is made up of various statistical societies, including ASA, INAR, WINAR, IMS, the Society of Statistical Canada, along with many friends of societies from across the globe. And COPSS bestows many awards each year, including this new COPSS Leader Academy, recently renamed to the COPSS Emerging Leader Award. And the purpose of this award is to recognize early career statistical scientists who show evidence of and potential for leadership. It also provides a mechanism for us to share our vision of leadership with the field. From this emerges this webinar series, which is co-organized by COPSS and the wonderful partner at the National Institute of Statistical Sciences, NISS for short. So this webinar series brings together leaders in the field of statistics and data science to share their expertise, experiences, and also perspectives on driving innovation and also advancing science in today's very complex and interdisciplinary landscape. And today's topic, causal inference, is a cornerstone of modern data science with applications spanning healthcare, social science, policies, and beyond. And it's at heart lies the challenge of answer critical questions like what if questions and making informed decision based on sound evidence. And we are very honored to have two outstanding leaders with us today who have made remarkable contributions to the field, Dr. Mark Vanderland and also Dr. Stuart. And throughout today's webinar, we're gonna explore the intersection of causal inference and interdisciplinarity, touching on methodological advances, challenges in real-world applications, and also leadership required to bridge a diverse field. And for the logistic and today's event, we have the following structure. So each panel will have about 10 minutes to talk about their leadership journey. And then I have prepared some questions for them. And finally, we're gonna open it up to all the participants. And we encourage you to actively participate by submitting your questions during the Q&A session following the speaker's presentation. And this is a fantastic opportunity, right, to engage with the two leading experts and also gain insight about how their experience can inspire your own work. Okay, before we move forward with their presentations, let me first introduce Mark. Mark will be the first speaker. So Mark is the Jiann-Ping Karl Peace Professor of Biostatistics and Statistics at UC Berkeley. He has made a contribution to survival analysis, semi-parametric statistics, multiple testing, and causal inference. Has developed the targeted maximum likelihood methodology and the general theory for superlearning. He is the founding editor of the Journal of Causal Inference and the International Journal of Biostatistics. He has authored 4 books on targeted learning, sensor data, and multiple testing, authored over 300 publications, and graduated over 50 PhD students. Truly remarkable. And he received the COPSS President Award in 2005, the Spiegelman Award in 2004, and the Van Danzig Award in 2005. So please join me in welcoming our first speaker, Mark.
All right, yeah, so thanks so much, and a real honor to be here and talk a little bit about my journey. So I've only literally a few slides. So I kind of think of it, I will talk mostly about my journey of research, which is really kind of focused towards how to learn optimally and robustly from complex real-world data as we find in public health and medical research and so on. And if you look at my whole journey from PhD on, it's almost like a circle, which starts with really trying to understand maximum likelihood estimation for multivariate sensor data and so on. And then essentially come back to that after a long 30-year journey, but of course enriched a lot with new insights. Let's see if I go to the next slide.
No, it is still on the first page.
Oh, wait a minute. Am I? Okay, this is weird. Sorry.
Hey, Mark, if you want, you can stop sharing and then start sharing again. It might just need to be refreshed.
Yeah, let me do that. Sorry, escape. All right. Did I stop sharing? Or?
Well, we can actually see it now.
Okay, but I'm going to, one second. This one is, you can see it? Let me see, right? Let me share this. Okay. Can you see this?
Yes, we can see.
Yeah.
All right. Slides. No, maybe this one works then. Okay, here it is. Yeah, so my research started in as a PhD student. I was born in the Netherlands, and I did my PhD in finished in 93, and worked under Richard Gill, who was an expert in counting processes and multiplicative intensity models and many other things. So I learned a lot from him. During that PhD, I worked on understanding maximum likelihood estimation, in particular the problem we have heard of Kaplan-Meier for right-centered failure time data. And then one question was, how do we generalize that to multivariate right-centered failure time data to learn the multivariate survival function? In that case, the MPMLE breaks down. So this is trying to do things in non-parametric models. And so I worked on how to repair this maximum likelihood estimator, and I came up with some kind of regularized maximum likelihood estimator. But I also learned a lot about the theory, about how to establish the asymptotic optimality of these estimators, and also how all kinds of techniques for proving things. And I learned about functional delta method and so on. And in particular, I came up with an identity which for analyzing maximum likelihood estimators, which I still use till this day, which really is a very powerful way, allowing you to really target your analysis on the actual estimator of interest. So then after my PhD thesis, I actually, during a workshop, which was where we was in honor of the PhD thesis, and we invited a bunch of people, and in particular, Jamie Robbins was there, and he said, who cares about dimension 2? The real world is very complex. And he was working on these kind of longitudinal complex observational studies and how to draw causal conclusions from it. So I worked with him for many years, and in particular tried to learn what he was working on, read his appendices, which weren't trivial, and learn about augmented inverse probe sensing weighting, double robustness, and so on. And we worked on a variety of problems in current status data, interval sensor data, and many more. And in particular, wrote a book at the end, what's called Unified Methods for Censored Longitudinal Data and Causality. Then that was in 2001. Then I also really got in more and more into machine learning, which I had been working on already, but I really wanted to understand the properties of cross-validation, which allows you to choose among different procedures, different algorithms, different tuning parameters, different methods. And cross-validation is very powerful that way. It just allows you to do that. But at that time, it wasn't really understood how powerful it was. That people thought of it more as just another method. And so I studied cross-validation with Sandrine Dudois in particular, and Aad van der Vaart, trying to understand the formal properties of cross-validation as a method for selecting among estimators. We proved an oracle inequality showing its asymptotically equivalent with an oracle selector, and worked on a variety of powerful results, such as the minimax adaptive epsilon net estimator, but also introduced the concept of superlearner, because it became clear that if you use cross-validation, you are really going to do a great job. And so you should build a library of many algorithms and use cross-validation to choose among them. And I call it superlearner because of its asymptotic equivalence with the best possible choice you could have made if you would have known the truth. So that was an important step for really getting into understanding how to do machine learning. And then I also studied, I got into multiple testing because we did a lot of collaborations in genomics. So eventually we wrote a bunch of papers, in particular kind of revisiting this whole resampling-based multiple testing, where we could utilize, in particular, what I learned about influence curves and asymptotic linearity and so on to really establish the right null distribution you should be using when you control familiarized errors or other type 1 errors. And so anyway, that resulted in a book which we call Resampling-Based Multiple Testing with Sandrine. And then in 2006, in response to the actual augmented IPCW, which was an estimating equation approach, which had some robustness issues, like the solutions of the equation might not exist, and it might also be very unstable. You might not need be a plugin estimator, so you might go out of bounds and so on. And so I came up with the idea of targeted maximum likelihood estimation as a way to, take an initial estimate like a superlearner for your data density, but then do a little targeted maximum likelihood step, which do some extra fitting in the right direction so that it becomes suddenly a great plugin estimator for the target estimate you care about. And so that became a whole field really, because it's very powerful and has a lot of flexibility to go in all kinds of directions. And so we published a few target learning books in 2011 and 2018 with Sherry Rose, with contributions from lots of people working in this area. So it has a lot of solutions for estimation problems and extensions such as collaborative TMLE, but also getting into causal inference for networks, causal inference for time series, and you name it. I also got in 2008 interest in adaptive designs, group sequential adaptive designs, where you kind of always learn from the previously enrolled subjects what works and then start randomizing your treatment, let's say, with probabilities depending on what you have learned, so that you can actually start giving the right treatment and maybe converts to an optimal rule as part of the sequential adaptive design. And so I developed theory for that, and in particular how to combine it with target maximum likelihood estimation so that you can have the most complex adaptive designs targeting some oracle design, but still completely unbiased due to the targeting step. Then I got also wanted to understand how we can guarantee asymptotic efficiency, because the machine learning algorithms did not have known rates of convergence, or did not even have the right rates of convergence you need. And so I came up with highly adaptive lasso as a very general, powerful algorithm. And so that resulted, that has a dimension-free rate of convergence, like n to the minus 1/3. And it resulted that we could claim that target maximum likelihood estimation, if you use highly adaptive lasso or superlearning, including highly adaptive lasso, then you're guaranteed asymptotically efficient. So there's, in essence, you solve the asymptotic curves of marginality. There's still, of course, the finite sample curves of marginality. And this is all without any smoothness assumptions, except assuming that your functions you're trying to learn are bounded in variation. I also got deeper into understanding how you can make these estimators with finite samples even better, and that resulted in higher order TMLE, so that you can start creating second order terms which become third order, so that they really become relatively small. And so again, now fighting the finite sample curse dimensionality. And currently I'm working on a book which really gets into everything we have now learned about the highly adaptive lasso and its role in targeted learning. And so that's a very exciting project. And so that's expected next year. We'll have a book finished. Let's see, is there, oops. Yeah, just a last minute, you know, of course, this is always working on applications, always funded by NIH grants, focusing mostly on HIV type applications, a lot of work with Maya Peterson and Laura Balzer. We also have done a lot of work on genomics, in particular with Sandrine, Dudois, and KLS, Sunus KLS, and so on. Mike Eisen, you name it. Environmental studies, started with Ira Tager and so on. Still doing a lot of research on diabetes with Romain Neugebauer from Kaiser, and learning about what survival would be under different dynamic treatment regimens. There's now a center of target machine learning here at Berkeley. And I also have a great interest in FDA-related applications, a priori specified estimators for generating real-world evidence under regulatory guidance. And we have yearly meetings organized, you know, bringing together top people from the FDA and pharma and so on, and academics. And that's it.
Thank you, Mark, for sharing your research journey, which is super clear, and what kind of topics you worked on and the motivations at different stages of your career. Without further ado, now let me introduce our second speaker, Liz. Liz Stuart is the Frank Hurley and Catharine Dorrier Chair and Bloomberg Professor of American Health in the Department of Biostatistics at Johns Hopkins University, with the joint appointments in the Department of Mental Health and the Department of Health Policy and Management. Her research interests are in design and analysis of approaches for estimating causal effects in experimental and non-experimental studies, including questions around the external validity of randomized trials and the internal validity of non-experimental studies, as well as methods for combining data sources to assess treatment effect heterogeneity and methods for evidence synthesis. She has published over 350 papers and have received research fundings for her work from many agencies, including the National Science Foundation, the Institute of Education Sciences, the WT Grant Foundation, and also the National Institute of Health. And she has served on advisory panels for the US Department of Education and the PCORI. She is the fellow of the ASA and the AAAS, received the Mid-Career Award from the Health Policy Statistical section of the ASA, the Gertrude Cox Award for Applied Statistics, Harvard University of Merito Lefkopolo Award for Excellence in Biostatistics, and the Society for Epidemiological Research, Marshall Jove Epidemiological Methods Award. She currently serves on the National Academy of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine Committee on National Statistics and co-chair the Committee on Applied and Theoretical Statistics. Now, let's welcome Liz to give us a presentation.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for having me. There we go. It's really nice to be with you all. Thanks for the nice introduction. I'll try to be speedy to get to questions. So I'm just going to give a little bit of a flavor for my path. You know, I won't focus as much on sort of the technical details. I wanted to just highlight sort of the interdisciplinary nature and sort of the opportunities to be in this interdisciplinary space and when working in causal inference and statistics more broadly. So just as a tiny bit of background, since my undergraduate days, kind of wanted to use data and evidence to kind of make the world a better place, as cheesy as that sounds. I have sort of found my way to that first by working at Mathematica Policy Research, which is a policy research firm that does a lot of sort of large scale government evaluations, I then did my PhD in statistics at Harvard, working with Don Rubin, partly because he was one of the statisticians sort of in that policy sort of causal space. And sort of I knew that that was kind of what I wanted to do. So I went to Harvard. I then went back to Mathematica for a couple of years. This is not a formal DAG, but a double-headed arrow there. And then in 2006, I moved to Johns Hopkins, where I've been since then. And just wanted to highlight a couple of things, which is that I'm now in the Department of Biostatistics, but I think particularly perhaps relevant for our conversation today about interdisciplinarity and leadership. Originally, when I was at Hopkins, I was in the Department of Mental Health. So I was assistant, associate, and full professor in mental health, also with a joint appointment in health policy and management, and also in biostatistics. And then I moved my primary appointment to biostatistics in 18 months ago when I became chair. And this slide also just sort of highlights some of the other centers and kind of that interdisciplinary world that I sort of sit at, again, sort of grounded very much in statistics and public health and lots of applications. Just a really high level overview of my methods work. Happy to talk more about details or people can look on my website. Broadly, what I've been interested in really since 2000 or so is design and analysis methods for estimating population causal effects. So this includes handling sort of internal validity issues in non-experimental studies, so methods like propensity scores and other design-based approaches, and then also enhancing the external validity of experiments. And that was really partly driven by my experience at Mathematica and sort of seeing on the ground kind of how hard it is to do randomized trials well, and particularly some of the potential generalizability concerns, but sort of how do we get kind of the internal validity and external validity and kind of balancing those. And then I've, as Stuart mentioned, sort of also done some work on causal inference on randomized trials. I actually didn't put it on this slide, I'm realizing, but a lot of my work in the past few years has been on policy evaluation, in particular, a lot of state policy evaluation projects. I think I might have some on the next slide. And I think a real theme is this sort of, per the theme of this webinar, a real theme of my work has been sort of sitting at this interface of strong causal inference methods and interdisciplinary science and public health in particular, and sort of how do we deal with the data realities and some of the complications and sort of balance that. This just highlights some of the collaborative work that I've done. I'll say a bit more on this in the next slide, but it's one of the great joys for me of being a statistician is the ability to work with really great colleagues in a variety of areas. And what you can't tell from the titles, these papers are sort of the applied papers, but what sort of ties them together are the statistical methods and the causal inference methods, like propensity scores, like difference and differences and comparative interrupted time series, other methods, again, sort of with a strong causal, looking for ways to use strong causal methods, a variety of types, to answer these really important public health questions. I wanted to just kind of have a couple big picture thoughts, and then I think we'll open it up to the questions. In thinking about this theme of leadership and interdisciplinarity. Oh, I guess I didn't say this actually on my first slide. During all this time, I also was in the dean's office part-time in the School of Public Health. So sort of have had a department chair leadership hat, as well as a dean's office, vice dean kind of leadership hat. And as she mentioned, sort of various national panels and National Academy of Sciences sorts of things. So anyway, happy to come back to that. But in thinking about sort of interdisciplinarity and leadership and causality, one thing that has really struck me about causal inference and why I have really enjoyed working in this field is that because of sort of the fundamental problem of missing potential outcomes, causal inference basically always involves some untestable assumptions. And so what we need to do is work really closely with collaborators who have substantive knowledge to assess those assumptions. So to understand, like, is this set of confounders a reasonable set of confounders? Are we missing something? In an interrupted time series policy evaluation, is it plausible to be comparing these different states? Really just sort of bringing in that deep knowledge. And again, I'm happy to talk more about that. So this has really been a theme of my work. Again, it has been sort of this sort of these papers, for example, are a result of deep collaborations where, for example, the Texas 2021 ban on abortion paper in the middle, Suzanne and Allison bring amazing knowledge about demographics and the data. And I will say the data for a lot of these methods of studies is incredibly messy. If you just download it from the website and sort of don't understand some of the complexities, you can really run into sort of misleading results. So I've really enjoyed sort of these collaborations where the substantive experts bring their expertise in the substance and in the data, and I can contribute the kind of statistical and causal inference methods expertise. And so that's just a theme, is sort of looking, one piece of advice, especially for the junior folks on the webinar, is to sort of find those collaborators who similarly value this sort of mix, where they understand and sort of desire strong causal methods for this purpose, and who want to engage in a deep collaboration and sort of push the boundaries of their work and of the methods and the data. So just kind of themes on the right were some of the things that I've sort of thought about as of key importance in the work that I've done over the years. Just a quick shout out to the various, you heard about sort of funders, and then also just family and friends. And again, that's one of the pieces of leadership that has been important for me, is working with people and sort of developing those wonderful collaborations and having a collegial time. So I will leave it at that. And I think we can turn to the general questions from Shu.
Thank you, Liz, for sharing your research and the leadership journey, which is really insightful. And we will now move to the moderator, the Q&A session. But for all the participants here, please use this time to start adding your questions to the Q&A functions, and we will later come back to all these questions here. Okay, and let's get started with our discussion. And these questions will for both the speakers here. So let's first focus on the recent development or advancement in causal inference. What kind of recent development in causal inference you find most promising for practical applications? Maybe we can start with.
I can kick us off. Maybe I'm going to talk about something that isn't really a current development, but that I would like to be, although there is some development. And that is that I think as a field, I'm particularly excited about methods that sort of, both design approaches that help kind of researchers really understand the comparisons they're making and the data they're using, as well as diagnostics to help people understand the assumptions, sensitivity analyses to those assumptions. And I say all that because I think, so I'm actually kind of stepping out right now from a day-long Bloomberg American Health Initiative Summit, where it's all on public health and, sort of impact in the United States and how do we improve health. And a theme throughout the entire day has been data and evidence. And, there is a real hunger for data and evidence, and I think we need it more than ever. And we as statisticians, I think, need to make sure that sort of we can communicate those methods and sort of help translate things. So I would sort of say some of the sort of diagnostics, whether it's graphical, sensitivity analyses, model checks, those sorts of things are what I think are going to have a lot of impact and use in the coming years.
This is also related to a question from Amy Blatt. He or she typed the questions to the chat. So in the causal inference models using network or DAG, which approach do you use to validate these models once they are trained? Because a lot of causal models will involve untestable assumptions, right? This question is very relevant. Anyone wants to address this?
No, yeah, one thing is, generally speaking, when you start doing these causal inference analysis, you have a time ordering. And so you're essentially having complex longitudinal data you're tracking over time. And that time ordering gives you a causal graph in the sense that the past has an arrow going to the future. So that is, I think, key. I don't like so much these causal models, which, based on cross-sectional data, making guesses. So I think that already takes a lot out of it. But then there are things like sequential randomization assumptions, one of the big assumptions for causal inference when you care about the causal impact of a multiple time point intervention. And so that is something, like Liz was also saying, we really need to understand what are the factors going into these treatment decisions, what are the factors going into the censoring decision, are we doing a good job measuring them, or is there maybe a variable which can block it, right? So the most recent time point measurements maybe block some of the factors. So that's a lot of, that's not something you can learn from the data. So that's something you have to really work with your collaborators and understanding the experiment, talk to the doctors who make decisions. So this is why it's so crucial, and I think Liz emphasized that as well, to really understand the experiments which generate the data in depth to the point that you could implement it on a computer and present it to your collaborator and say, do you think this is a reasonable way this data might have been generated? And that really gets you in depth understanding of everything what might be going on. And I think that's crucial.
Good, thank you, Mark. Do you also want to share some ideas on recent advancements in causal inference that can influence future research and policy decisions?
No, it's extremely hot topic these days is, how are we going to generate real world evidence? And I think an incredible demonstration project is essentially what the FDA is involved in. In other words, they actually have to make decisions based on analysis, which are not RCTs necessarily, and are really based on real world data. And they might be pure observational, they might be an underpowered randomized trial augmented with external data. It might be even a single arm study augmented. So these are incredibly challenging problems. And one of the things you need is a priori specified. And that's, of course, what the FDA has required, but it was never a big deal for RCT. But now we need it for observational data. Now, the estimators you're going to use are much more complex. And so there are many more decisions to make, in particular in the context of target maximum likelihood estimation. What precise targeting step are you going to do? What is your superlearner? What's your library of algorithms? Everything has to be a priori specified. How are you going to truncate? So how to actually do that? That's something that's essentially what I've been thinking about my whole life. And I still see a lot of challenges. But anyway, that's where I think where we have to move. And I think of that project as a very exciting project, because once we can show how these things could be done in a reliable way, then it's also an example for most of academic publishing, right? Because a lot of academic publishing is not following the rules, and they can play with data, they can try this, try that, right? But that's once you have to make actionable decisions, then it's a whole different ballgame. And so this is a really beautiful, big project we're all involved in. And if we can nail that, I think it's going to increase the whole level of academic publishing as well throughout society. So that's for me a really important research area. And that, of course, comes with so many things. Like Liz was talking about sensitivity analysis. How are we precisely doing that? There's so many interesting tools, and they are transparent. And how are we going to do it? How are we bringing in negative controls and so on? So it's really starting to build guidelines. Hopefully we can reasonably agree on, right? And it's at least set the benchmarks. And so that we can get a much more stepwise, thorough process, which is going to generate this real world evidence, which is more than running the estimator. It is really the whole translation of the real world into what's the causal estimate, what's the identification result, and so on. And even a priori specifying the sensitivity analysis, what are you going to put in there? That whole package is going to be the evidence. And how are we going to precisely do that, I think is an exciting area.
Thank you for sharing this good idea here. And we all know that interdisciplinary collaboration is very important, right, to drive the innovation and also advances in the methodological development. And I think this question will be very helpful for a lot of junior faculties or junior researchers, because we know it's important, but how do we identify a meaningful and impactful problem to work on, right? And can you share some specific examples with us?
Go ahead, Elizabeth.
Okay, and actually, I'll just quickly add one thing to the previous conversation, which I totally agree with your response, Mark. And I'll just flag that the journal Observational Studies actually accepts protocols for non-experimental studies. So I totally agree. I think, and just wanted to flag for this audience that could be an outlet for publishing sort of plans for observational studies. And I do think we need more of that. So collaboration. So I feel like well, at first I want to say that not all collaborations work out. So I remember when I was a new assistant professor, I definitely had some that I spent a lot of time on and they just didn't go anywhere. So I want to acknowledge that, and sort of for the junior folks, don't want you to feel stressed of like, if some collaboration like doesn't work out, like it's okay. Some will be good, some won't be. The ones for me that have been the most successful kind of relate to some of my earlier comments. It's ones where they approach the problem, they understand that they really need a PhD level biostatistician type to help them. Where they understand that there are data complications. They understand that it's not just sort of an off the shelf, like, oh, can you run some regressions for me? And so some of that is like the conversations at the beginning and sort of kind of just getting a sense for what they value. For me, the kind of public health impact makes a huge difference too, of course, and sort of working on topics that I feel like are important and timely and might have impact. And I'll say one of the really good signs of collaboration is when this is sort of specific to those of us in kind of NIH grants world, is when your collaborators, empower you as the statistician to lead projects. So I have some first authored substantive papers on my CV, and I feel like those are actually the papers I'm kind of the most proud of because they pushed me out of my comfort zone. But then also where those collaborators maybe build in a methodological aim in the grant. So on many grants I work in, we might have two kind of substantive aims and then a third methodological aim. And again, it's through that long-term collaboration where they sort of realize like, oh, we can't just use off-the-shelf methods. We're going to need to sort of develop some newer methods and then sort of leaning into that. So those are those. And also, I guess the final thing is people you can work with, sort of just like a style. Different people have different work styles. I am not a last minute person. I don't work well with people who are doing, writing grants at the very last minute. So I think also kind of listen to yourself and understand just kind of work style, and then finding the people who kind of you click with in that regard. And that will make it all more fun and manageable, which is really important.
Yeah, I second all of that. I mean, like the moment you start working with people who, believe the traditional statistics is fine and you can just apply these models and be done with it, and you just need a statistician to get these p-values and the confidence intervals, then you should stop, right? That's where it stops. And that has been the past a lot. But I do think everything is changing, and that's due to the whole community who has been pushing this, that, we are part of the science. We are not just some external technician. You really have to understand the science, and the statistics is part of that science. And building a team where we are really all together excited about, finding the right approach for answering the real question of interest. And we often talk about the roadmap of causal inference as just a stepwise process, which makes clear that all these steps require that. And we need to ask, what's the causal question? So that requires thinking with the collaborators, right? And many other, and then we need to understand if the assumptions are met and so on. So yes, absolutely. Overall, the collaborations which have been exciting are the ones where people feel some sense, oh, wow, we're really going to change the way we do things. And this is really exciting. And that's the kind of collaborations we have had. And I'm sure this has had all over the place. But that's where you really start making a difference and having an impact. Yeah.
Sounds good. As collaborations bring opportunities, I think it also poses some challenges, right? So I think it will be beneficial to share some challenges you have faced in interdisciplinary projects and how did you overcome them?
Mark, you want to kick this one off?
Oh, no, maybe you are better at this.
I could start. I think Mark already alluded to, so one challenge is like the collaborators that are sort of don't really see the value in us. So I'll set that one aside. Two others I would raise. One is collaborators who want to ask questions that the data is just not feasible to ask. This happens a lot in non-experimental studies, and especially a lot in the kind of policy evaluation world, where they'll be like, we want to look at the effect of this policy and that policy and this combination of policies. And honestly, like they might not even be observed together. Like the policies they want to study may never actually even be observed together. So I think one challenge for me has been helping people sort of understand the limitations of what they can ask and trying to sort of nudge towards feasible research questions. The other challenge, which might particularly resonate with this group, is that in working on some of these applied projects, or trying to publish them in top scientific journals or medical journals, those journals are not always super excited about fancy new methods. That is changing in the past few years, and could have a whole different webinar on the new JAMA sort of white paper on causal language. But we have certainly, like I've been on a few papers in like the Annals of Internal Medicine and some other journals like that, where we have phone calls with the editors to sort of talk through what can we say, you know, what language should we use? And there have been a few papers where we have actually used sort of the more basic methods in the paper itself, and then written either a separate methods paper or even just the supplementary materials where we've put the sort of fancier, newer stuff, because the journal has sort of been, the reviewers have been sort of nervous about something new. So it's sometimes pushing those boundaries is hard, and the reviewers don't necessarily want it. They kind of are like, well, we want to see the old standard method too. And so sort of balancing that has sometimes been a challenge.
Yeah, these are excellent points. Yeah, I agree that, I mean, causal inference is incredibly challenging. And if you would a priori specify a typical question, don't be surprised there's no support in the data. And you end up with confidence intervals which are showing non-significant results, and that could be upsetting. On the other hand, and this is where I think it's the positive angle of all that, is that because of this, we can actually start, and there are methods where you start, you know, making your question respond to where the support is. And that is, of course, itself a challenging arena, right? How do you do that? And of course, there's lots of work on that, but that's interesting itself. But one of the things is that, you know, it's progress if we start actually analyzing questions which are supported by the data, instead of pushing through and then maybe some lousy method and getting significant results, and you only put the field, you know, behind. It doesn't help you. So I think but that's why we shouldn't just be saying, okay, are we going to find nothing? We're going to find nothing. No, let's find the things we can do and what we can learn, and also get good results for that. Yeah, regarding, I think that's a very, like Liz was also saying, there's of course continuously learning from each other, and of course there's a lot of resistance simultaneously, and this is all normal. You know, you have all different generations trained in different ways, and dealing with that in a patient way and constructive way, and listening carefully to these people, right? Many times they have made good points, is important, and so many times we have to be pragmatic, you know. And we are doing, for example, consulting in the context of pharma companies submitting to the FDA. How do, you know, can we use these sophisticated methods? Is it okay, or should we maybe only do them in a sensitivity analysis, right? Because of the fact that the FDA is not yet ready for it. All that is fine. I think that's progress. And as long as we can, you know, I'm already, at least if we can use sophisticated approaches and transparent approaches in whatever way, and then we still have to show more traditional, now so be it. I think that's how we make progress. Yeah, so that's it for me.
Thank you. All these comments are quite insightful. And now that we have discussed the methodological development and also real-world data applications, let's turn to like the balance between theory and practice. How to navigate the balance between developing theoretical causal inference methods and ensuring their practical applicability across different domains. I think that like strike a balance is very important, but the question becomes how.
Yeah. So shall I start, Elizabeth? Or yeah. Yeah. For me, I mean, for me, it's always the eyes on the ball, right? What are we trying to do? And for me, the push is always, how are we going to be able to a priori specify statistical methods which actually are generating reliable evidence? And as I work on that, I find out their challenges, and they require theory. And that then makes me work on theory. And that's kind of, and by the way, I'm a particular person, right? I have an interest also in theory. I like to work on it, right? So that doesn't mean that everybody has to go that route, but at least acknowledging and understanding the bigger picture and then bringing in others to help with that, that's brilliant. But that's, for me, yeah, throughout my career, you see that, right? I always work on theoretical problems which can help me to move forward that overall approach. And as long as I keep that eye on the ball, what I'm trying to do, what the end goal is, I feel I'm working on relevant theory. So I'm not, personally, I don't like to work on toy problems, right? And I also don't think I need them, because I think the theory needed for real world solutions is actually very hard. So I don't need the toy problems. They are hard enough as they are. And they require a lot of deep tools, in fact. So that's, yeah, I will leave it at that for now.
Thanks. Yeah, I'll expand on that, or just pivot a little. So I want to highlight one of the things Mark said, which is sort of he enjoys theory and sort of leans into that. I think one piece of advice is to kind of lean into what you enjoy and sort of are good at, and that I think we as a field need to sort of value like the different pieces. And I say that partly because I think as I reflect on this question, I reflect on the fact that for 15 years, I was in the Department of Mental Health, and sort of that with a joint appointment in biostatistics, but that allowed me to really lean into the applied work that I wanted to do, because I sort of understood that my promotion criteria was going to be sort of statistical methods, but also that mental health application. And so that was a great fit for me. And it sort of turns out that along the way, I did a bunch of methodological work, very much motivated by the mental health applications. And I did enough methodological work that, promotion in biostatistics, probably would have gone through as well. But I think sort of thinking about the positions that, sort of the roles and kind of the expectations, and figuring out the path that sort of makes sense for you, and sort of that we as a field, I think, need to value these different contributions and different sort of pieces of that pipeline, in a sense.
Yeah, and I think that's an extremely important point. And that's why, again, if you think about the roadmap for causal inference, there's all these steps. There's the translation, there's the theory, there's the identification results, there's so many contributions, software, right? And you name it, there's so many contributions necessary, and that's why you really need these powerful multidisciplinary teams to make it all work. And that's also how I, work with students. I always try to find out, what is your strength? What gets you excited, right? And because we need all kinds of people. And so yeah, that was well said.
Thank you. And mentioning the students, I think mentorship and leadership plays a very important role in shaping the next generation of the researchers. So maybe let's delve into your experiences, reflecting on your leadership roles. What kind of strategy you have found effective in fostering innovations and also collaborations within your team? Because both of you mentor a lot of students, right?
Yeah, go ahead, Elizabeth, if you.
I think I would maybe pick up on Mark's final comment previous of sort of finding what each person is good at, and sort of what they get joy out of, and helping them find their way in that regard. I think also making sure that they then, when I say find their way, like make sure that they find a position or like a career path that speaks to their strengths and that sort of is going to be meaningful for them. The other thing this is maybe not a direct answer to that question, but one thing I was reflecting on is the value in, when I was talking about these different collaborations, the value in finding collaborators who are at a similar career stage as you. So when I was a third-year assistant professor, I sort of found some other kind of mid-assistant professors, and we, have now collaborated for 15 years. And so I think kind of also just helping people, again, find the collaborations that are going to be meaningful to them. That's sort of been a key thing. And to think about that, not just like trying to work with the big names, but also sort of work with other researchers from other areas, the team kind of approach that Mark was referencing, and figuring out that for people kind of at similar career stages can be incredibly meaningful long-term.
Yeah, exactly. And one thing which at least we also try to do, is really create a culture, right? So that the whole group of students and postdocs and whatever faculty are all kind of open, are willing to ask questions, don't pretend you understand something if you don't. Be nice to your collaborators, help them out. I mean, it seems a trivial thing to say, but it's actually, you know, it's not always the way it goes. And that's at least one thing I think students feel with me. Just don't bullshit me, right? That gets me angry. You can try to be nice that way, it doesn't work. Just be open, be honest. You can ask every question you want. You can be so-called dumb. There are no dumb questions. Then we can make progress. And I think that you see students starting out in the wrong way and they quickly get corrected and it starts all working. And I think that kind of lays a foundation for creating an environment where students can help each other, postdocs can help each other, and it's just a very intellectual, stimulating environment. And that the other thing I have experienced as well is I need to do my own research in order to advise well when we get to more theoretical topics, right? So I cannot just let it like, oh yeah, they will figure it out, because it's quite advanced, and so they can waste a lot of time. And so that's where I have to really make the time to work on these projects myself as well, trying to understand it fully in order to be an effective advisor for them, to push them forward. That depends probably on the topic, but that's my experience, and that helps me and helps them.
Very good suggestions. And I think we are almost only have 8 minutes. Let me just go for one final questions here, because right now let's reflect on the future of the field. And let's consider the intersection of AI and machine learning with causal inference, because AI and machine learning are very popular nowadays. Everybody is talking about AI and ML. So can you share some examples where AI and the machine learning has been successfully or unsuccessfully used in causal inference to address the real world problems?
Yeah, I can start, and then this you can jump in. Machine learning has been incredibly important, right? Because, and also that's incredibly important causal inference. And certainly, you know, I've been working on that forever. Because I quickly saw that these parametric models, you know, if we start a priori specifying them or we start data mining, none of that is good. And so we need a priori specified machine learning algorithms which have the flexibility to learn these true relations. And that's part of getting an unbiased causal effect estimator. So we cannot do without. And but then of course you have to also develop the theory to make it all work. And now certainly, again, like I said, for even submissions from on the regulatory guidance of the FDA or the EMA to a priori specify them with machine learning is important to generate reliable evidence. But again, there are other steps involved there. You need to make sure, maybe through outcome-blind simulations, that your implementation works properly and provides the kind of control, type 1 error and confidence intervals you claim. So that's, but the other thing is, it's very exciting as well. Like, you know, the cross boundary, for example, with the data science community. So more recently, you know, we have been working for a long time on things like longitudinal target mix and like estimation for causal inference. There are packages, but one of my students started working on transformer deep learning, and through that, you know, we have now what we call this deep LTMLE, which uses this very powerful computational framework. But not just that, it also changed the methodology. So they figured out, they call it temporal difference learning, but it avoids the sequential regression and allows you to simultaneously learn all these sequential regressions. And it really has all kinds of advantages and kind of lifts up that whole area. And also, you know, again, builds on all these computational advances. So these are examples where, yeah, we really can move the field forward by utilizing what other people have worked on and made so much progress on. And then we brought in the team Ali as part of that, but that's where we just kind of work all together to get a more powerful story.
Yeah, I like how one theme I would take from Mark's comments there that I totally agree with is sort of the complementary nature of sort of AI, ML and causal inference tools. I think there's a lot. I mean, we've been using machine learning to estimate propensity scores for like 15 years, like sort of the idea of using these flexible models and in new ways, like Mark was just alluding to, I think is really important and useful. Where I get really nervous is when there's sort of a feeling that AI can magically kind of identify causal effects or estimate them without sort of people who think carefully about the missing potential outcomes and the assumptions, because I certainly see some of that in some of the literature. And so I think that's the part that I get really nervous about. And I think we as a causal inference community need to kind of keep reminding that there isn't sort of some magic, like if there is sort of an apparent magic, there's probably some assumptions sort of underlying that. And I think we maybe can help think through articulating what those assumptions are and then helping think through how reasonable they are. So I think that's sort of where I look for both opportunity, but also a little bit of nervousness.
Thank you. I think we're almost close to the end, but let's pick up one question from the audience and see. Let me see. I will read it out loud. So one question is, how do you explain causal relationships to collaborators who have no background in causal inference? And in my experience, when working with biologists, they understand the distinction between association and causation. However, I find it challenging to explain causal inference models, which rely on assumptions to them, and feedback or advice will be greatly appreciated.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of progress has been made, right? It's like you first start talking about this kind of hypothetical trial you would have in mind so that we can at least agree on what the real causal question is of interest. And so there's like this target trial framework of thinking. And so there's a lot of ways of nicely communicating with your collaborators of what we are trying to define as our causal question. And so that's at least something I think is doable. Then we get towards identification results. So I think, again, the causal roadmap that we often refer to is just very helpful because, people get often confused because they have all these steps in their mind and they want to jump to the next one. Let's do one at a time so that you don't get confused, right? What is the causal estimate? Let's talk about that. That's very doable to communicate that. Then what's the identification result we can rely on, right? In order, is there actually a way to learn this from the data? And what are the assumptions? So we can talk about that. But don't mix it all up. Don't jump to, oh, I want to do IPTW, or I do want to do propensity score matching, or I want to do TML. What? No, we're not talking about that. We're just talking about the formulation. What is the actual estimate we might learn from the data which best approximates your causal question? And how are we thinking about the causal gap? How are we thinking about these assumptions? We'll address them in the sensitivity analysis. So, and then finally, once we have that estimate, then we're starting to talk about estimation. Yeah, that's, again, I think we can be transparent about it as much as possible. But at some point, we have to have an a priori specified algorithm which is going after it. But then even that is, if they feel uncomfortable, that's why we do simulations, right? We can show simulations imitating the very data we have and see how it works. And that might build confidence. It's a little bit like driving a car, right? I mean, you need to build some confidence. And that's fine that they are a little hesitant because, why would I trust anything? I think they shouldn't, right? So they should ask these questions. Show me it works. So yeah, go ahead, Liz.
I don't have much to add there. Yeah, I totally agree. And I think often getting that sort of clarity of what are we trying to do here is often like really the hardest part, and sort of then the rest kind of can follow. And I've been in some meetings where we spend hours sort of like circling around, like what is the question you're really trying to answer? And eventually we get there. And then sort of sometimes it's kind of obvious from there. And this is, again, though, why I also really appreciate methods that have sort of clear diagnostics, a lot of transparency as a way to sort of help communicate those different pieces. So I'll leave it there because I know we're basically at time.
Yeah, thank you. We are just on time, and but we do not get access to all the questions. Maybe later we can share all the questions from the participant to our panelists.
Sure. Yeah.
Thank you so much
Absolutely.
for listening. And if you find the conversation to be helpful, please share these recordings with your colleagues. And thank you, Mark and Liz, for your time with us today. And special thank you for those behind the scenes, and stay tuned for more events like this from the COPSS-NISS Leadership Webinar Series. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's great to do this.
Bye.